Welcome back to the channel where music is king. We love music, and we hope you do too. Mr. P's Music Fans proudly presents
For 3 days in August of 1969, 500,000 young people attended the Woodstock Music and Art Fair. For that weekend, it was the third largest city in the state of New York, and the most celebrated and peaceful gathering in pop history. At least it was peaceful for most people.
I was scared stiff. I pictured a life in jail for manslaughter when 20,000 people died.
There was no euphoria for me at Woodstock.
First of all, we didn't know that 500,000 people were going to show up. You know, we'd never seen a crowd that size. We'd never seen a crowd of 200,000.
I was just thinking about doing a business venture earlier in the year, and now I was wondering whether I was going to go down as a person who had electrocuted 50,000 people.
You know, there was always that sense that it's all going well, but with this many people and this much unpredictability, apocalypse is just around the corner.
It was the 60s, and apocalypse was just around the corner. It was a troubled time.
Every time there were 50 or more kids in the street somewhere, there was a police riot going on. People were getting shot just hanging around and talking about stuff. This wasn't just some fun time, you know, like peace and love, man. There were people getting hurt and killed and stuff.
It was a time of extreme opposites. While Richard Nixon bombed Vietnam, LSD guru Timothy Leary ran for governor of California.
I think we'll win. We want to turn on the whole state.
Just weeks after man first set foot on the moon, the Manson family went on a brutal murder spree.
There were as many kids of that age at Woodstock that weekend as there were in Vietnam.
How this peaceful population came together for 3 days is very much a 60s story. A story about 4 guys who forged an unlikely partnership and stumbled into history.
I feel so sure of myself, knowing my dentures are really clean, odor-free, all because of Polident tablets.
John Roberts was the heir to the Polident denture cream fortune. He grew up in Eatontown, New Jersey, and graduated as a history major from the University of Pennsylvania in 1966.
I had a very Ivy League kind of preppy background. Tweety Brooks Brothers outfit. When it began, I looked like a 48-year-old, and I think by the time it was over, I looked like a typical 24-year-old circa 1969.
Joel Rosenman grew up the son of a dentist in upscale Huntington, Long Island. Joel had a brief career playing guitar in a lounge band. But like John, Joel was pure Ivy League. He got a diploma from Princeton before becoming a highly ambivalent graduate of Yale Law School.
I had gone to law school because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life.
In the summer of '66, 24-year-old Joel met 21-year-old John Roberts while playing golf, and a friendship was born. Within a few weeks, Joel and John were roommates on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, 2 young men scheming to make their mark on the world.
John and I were both dissatisfied with our working arrangements in New York City.
By the start of 1967, John Roberts had a job as a researcher at a Wall Street firm. He hated it. Joel Rosenman had landed his first job as a lawyer, and he hated it. That summer, just a year after they'd met, they both quit their jobs.
I had an idea to write a sitcom about 2 guys, good friends, more money than brains, who want to be venture capitalists. So we went back, sat down, and tried to think up nutty business ventures. And that's how we came to take an ad in the Wall Street Journal claiming to be young men with unlimited capital looking for business ideas.
They were truly two young men with lots of cash. John Roberts received $250,000 from his family when he turned 21. He would receive $1 million when he was 25, another $1 million at 30, and another at 35.
Somewhere in all of this, we found ourselves looking at a proposal to build a recording studio in Manhattan. John and I borrowed some money using John's trust fund as security.
Became Media Sound on 57th Street and 8th Avenue.
Media Sound became a popular Manhattan recording studio. In the summer of '68, John and Joel, two square Ivy League preppies, were planted firmly in the very groovy music business. Meanwhile, two guys with very different backgrounds and some ideas of their own were about to form another friendship. Michael Lang left his home in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn at 16. After dropping out of NYU, he moved south and ran one of the first head shops in Miami. He also promoted fledgling rock bands and staged a small rock festival. Michael Lang lived in a very different world than Joel Rosenman and John Roberts.
I mean, there was sort of the square world or the straight world, and there was this psychedelic world.
Like Michael Lang, Artie Kornfeld was from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Artie had already made his mark in music. By 1968, he had written over 30 songs, including co-writing Jan and Dean's hit single, Dead Man's Curve, before becoming a vice president at Capitol Records.
I was music business. I was a writer and a songwriter, a producer, you know, and that's what I did. That was my whole life.
In December 1968, 23-year-old Michael Lang migrated back north to a small artist colony in rural Woodstock, 100 miles upstate from New York City. Michael was managing a band called The Train when he made an appointment at Capitol Records with 26-year-old Artie Kornfeld.
I just called him up. He was a friend of one of the guys in this band called The Train, where I was helping out at the time. And I called him, and on the phone, I guess, we realized we were from the same neighborhood. So he said, come over, and I did.
I was standing on my desk, smoking a little hash. My secretary said that there was a kid from your neighborhood that wanted to see you, and that was Michael. So I gave him a development deal. We went in the studio, never quite came off, but Michael started to hang out.
So then Artie and I become friends. And we came up with the idea of doing the festival in Woodstock in conjunction with kicking off a recording studio, which I thought there was a need for.
Because it would be a great place, because the band was up there, Janice was living up there, Dylan was up there, and we felt it would be a great place to have a retreat to go and record.
Michael and Artie wanted their own recording studio. John and Joel had already financed one. All four had worked with a lawyer named Miles Lurie. The connection was a natural.
And the phone rings. It is Miles Lurie, the lawyer for one of our recording studio partners.
I got a couple of clients that I'd like you to meet. They're about your age.
Through the door to present a new business proposal came Michael and Artie. These were clearly hippies.
More business experience in a way than any of us.
And they slapped the proposal down on the table and said, this is it.
And attached to the bottom of the proposal was the following fairly riveting sentence. Woodstock being the home of a lot of famous artists, we think we could get some of them to do a small concert to celebrate the opening of the recording studio.
We decided that we would do the concert first because John and I had our trump card. We were going to be the financing group. And then with the proceeds of the concert, we would build a recording studio.
That notion resonated with me because I think the evening before I'd gone to see the movie Monterey Pop, and it blown me away. I guess what happened from that moment through the festival was we somehow converted the recording studio project into Monterey Pop, and then some.
The four equal partners formed a new company called Woodstock Ventures. As they lurched forward, they had no clue how far beyond their wildest dreams their venture would take them. Coming up,
when you pick up Wendy's all white.
In early 1969, John Roberts, Joel Rosenman, Artie Kornfeld, and Michael Lang, two preppies and two hippies, joined in a thoroughly unlikely partnership called Woodstock Ventures. Their mission? to stage an outdoor rock concert and raise money for an upstate New York recording studio. It seemed so simple.
Michael had undertaken the bulk of the production. Artie had undertaken the promotion and advertising. John and I had undertaken the financing.
Financing was the key. A typical fee in '69 for a top rock act was $5,000. To ensure their ability to hire big acts, John's Polydent fortune allowed the four unproven promoters to offer $12,000.
I had a relationship with a bank, and a very hip banker named Jack Gillen, still a friend of mine, who kept a piranha fish in his office to scare away investors who weren't thinking of paying them back after they borrowed. And we said, well, we're going to probably need about $250,000 to do this thing. And after that money is spent, the ticket revenues should pay for the rest, and then some. And the idea was to make enough money from Woodstock to build the recording studio. Jack said, hey, sounds fine with me.
John and Joel would tend to the finances at an office they opened near their Manhattan recording studio, Media Sound. Michael opened his own office downtown, where he was free to hire a staff outside the conservative influence of the money guys.
In the beginning, Michael was a very unknown quantity to me. He was unlike the people I'd known growing up. He had agendas that he didn't share. If I could fault Michael, it is that he plays his cards way too close to the vest.
There wasn't enough time to really educate everybody as to what had to happen. And frankly, I don't know that I could have, because most of it was a blueprint somewhere in my head.
Artie wasn't invited to join Michael downtown. He didn't feel too welcome uptown either.
Michael, Joel, and John decided that Artie was the crazy musician, you know. At one point, I felt like I was like the outsider.
John and Joel felt that Artie was a bit out of control in some ways. And in some ways, he probably was. But not to the point where it was really going to be a damaging thing to the project. It was just Artie being out there at that time.
Michael Lang was the only one of the four already splintering partners with any experience producing a rock festival. But Woodstock was far more ambitious than anything he'd ever done before. And they still hadn't found a place to throw the big party.
Woodstock was the first location. Unfortunately, it never really existed as a location because there was no open ground big enough once we really got serious about it.
They found a large plot of land in Wallkill, New York, about 35 miles from Woodstock. The Wallkill site had great access, electricity, and water, but making a deal would be difficult.
We engaged that land and went about securing permits. We would go to the town meetings up there, and they were kind of scary, really. First of all, Michael Lang had long hair.
Yeah, it was definitely them and us. We were really under the threat of physical harm from some of the people.
They told them that we were expecting as many as 50,000 people, and that the activities that would take place on this property were classical and folk music and arts and crafts. The grown-ups on the zoning board began to hear from their kids that something was going to happen on that property that didn't quite resemble what they had issued a permit for.
Most of them really believed we were going to put acid in their water and rape their daughters.
You just wonder what it's all about, what their ideas are, what makes them feel this way, what makes them dress this way. It's a very complex feeling.
And as the size of the event grew, their nervousness grew proportionately, until finally they went to court and revoked our permit. We didn't have the resources or obviously the time to fight it.
We'd sold tickets and we had advertised the Wallkill site.
We were doing a great job. We'd sold 100,000 tickets.
And we were left without a home 5 weeks before the event.
They had also booked most of the concert. Their plan to overpay the acts had worked. But these were some of the world's biggest and busiest rock bands, and rescheduling them would be next to impossible. Woodstock Ventures decided to press on.
We started looking for another site. And when I say looking, I mean really looking. We'd have helicopter, and we'd go flying around.
An unlikely local hero named Max Yasgur came to the rescue.
Max called me up after having met with Michael Lang and said, I think a tremendous injustice has been done to you down in Wallkill, and I can right that injustice, and I'd be interested in renting you my land for the weekend. It's going to cost you, though. We were paying $7,500 in Wallkill, and Max inserted a zero at the end of that and said, that's what it's going to cost to have my land.
To avoid paying refunds to 100,000 ticket holders, $75,000 was a bargain. Woodstock Ventures paid Max Yasgur and took out a full-page ad in the New York Times announcing the festival's new home, 50 miles east of Wallkill.
And finding a guy like Max Yasgur, who was basically shunned by the community by the end of it, that sort of heroism that you find just out there in the sticks is an amazing thing to find.
Coming up, Ventures had found a home for their rock festival in the nick of time. Max Yasgur's 600-acre farm was a tranquil natural bowl about 98 miles from New York City. But it had no telephones, no water, no electricity, and no easy access. Yasgur's farm was miles from any major thoroughfare. But it was a beautiful spot, and there was no other choice. Team Woodstock staff of 1,000 employees now prepared to construct a concert facility for 50 to 100,000 people. They had 3 weeks to get it done.
How long did it take you to put it together? 2, 3 months?
Working on it for about 9 months.
9 months? Full time?
Yeah.
Are you in charge of the whole thing? Yeah. But you got backers, I presume.
We had to get experts, engineering experts, build stages. We had to make deals for food, parking people, security. All of this was frantic.
We had the telephones, and we had the water, and then was all the stuff that went on the stage, associated the turntable and the light show deck and all the power for the stage and the lighting for the stage and all that. And the scaffolding, not to mention the sound system.
126 decibels of sound is the threshold of pain.
1 toilet per 100 people is what the state wants. The numbers seemed like madness.
There were also less conventional preparations to be made. Hugh Romney, later known as Wavy Gravy, was the founder of the Hog Farm, a well-known West Coast commune whose job would be to set up free kitchens and a place where people on bad acid trips could get help.
Anyone who was tried to be in touch with what was going on knew of the Hog Farm. They had been in Life magazine, they had been here, they had been there.
Our communication was good, and our skills were good with working with people who are on pot or LSD. So they needed us there because of course they knew that there was going to be a lot of drugs. I mean, you can't help but have that when you have music. You're going to have, during that time, psychedelics.
Next thing you know, there's 85 of us and 15 Indians in our own American Airlines Astro jet going to Woodstock. But when we got off the airplane in New York, there was the world press gathered, and they said, "Oh, the Hog Farm, you're here to do the security." I said, "My God, they've made us the cops." I said, "Well, do you feel secure?"
Security in 1969 was a serious matter. Just a year earlier, in the summer of '68, civil rights and anti-war protests had erupted into riots across America. Wes Pomeroy, who is now deceased, was in charge of security.
I worked for Wes. So Wes and I went and made a deal with the police commissioner at the time that we were going to be able to interview and hire a number of New York City policemen. They were going to come up and be our police, except the night before the festival, the police commissioner got cold feet. I don't know what happened. There was political pressure in New York. And they said, no cops. There was a policeman at the 6th Precinct, an officer in charge, who went ahead and gathered us, a group of about 300 police people who would not give us their real names. We had to pay them in cash.
As the last days of preparation dwindled, Michael pushed his crews day and night. John and Joel were working the phones at their headquarters in an old telephone building a mile away from the site. No one is quite sure where Artie was.
4 guys in our 20s. We had never produced an event like this. We were hiring good people, but it turns out that creating a small city, or in that case, the 3rd largest city in New York, as it turned out, for that weekend, requires a lot more than what we had put together.
On the morning of August 13th, 1969, 2 full days before the festival was set to begin, the construction crews showed up for work as usual. But something unusual was happening. 50,000 early birds had already arrived.
Nobody knew it was going to be gargantuan. The gargantuan thing happens when you realize that you're not done, and you're never going to be done. They're already coming. You know, they're over the hill, and they're here.
Max had refused to let Mel Lawrence, who was the head of operations, put up the fencing lest the cows that morning not give milk. So the fencing issue had been relegated to the last moment.
Michael woke me up. It was like 6, and he said, "You won't believe it." And there was 50,000 people out there on the field, you know. So we knew at that point there was no gates.
If they were there 2 days early, then these thoughts that we were having that maybe we would get to 100,000 people seemed trivial.
There were maybe 50,000 people on the infield, and they said, you want to clear the infield, we want to start taking tickets now. And we said, do you want a good movie or a bad movie?
The choice was to try to collect money and risk a riot, or to begin the dizzying process of surrender.
There was this moment on Wednesday before the festival began when I was still thinking, we can still do it. We can get these gates up. We can collect tickets. This is going to work. It's going to be just fine.
You don't even have to bother bringing your tickets or anything, because they aren't going to collect them. There's no way they can. They got a fence that's like half up, and there are people just sitting in that field. It's really beautiful.
The team made a lame attempt to secure fences around the site, but it was too late. Film producer Bob Maurice and director Michael Wadley had been trying for weeks to raise money to capture the festival on film. As the hours counted down, they grew more determined. They went to Artie for help. Artie went to Joel and John.
And I said, I wasn't born yesterday. Documentaries never make any money. And, I mean, you'll have to go somewhere else.
Artie knew Fred Weintraub, who was in the movie division at Warner Brothers.
So I just called them up and said, guys, I want to talk to you. And I walked in and said, would you shoot dice with $100 grand? And if this is a disaster, you'll have the best disaster movie in all time.
The day before the music started, Warner Brothers put up $100,000, and Woodstock, the movie, was born.
And it kind of happened like everything else happened. It just sort of came together.
And I remember waking up around 5:30, 6 o'clock, Friday morning, and I just opened and I said, holy what is going on here?
And I looked out, and I saw thousands and thousands of smiling faces.
Everything was peaceful in this town. When I came down here Friday morning, I couldn't believe my eyes.
Now, who knew that people would get into a traffic jam and say, screw it, I'm just going to leave my car here? Who would ever figure that? I mean, that's never happened before.
Everything was tied up. There were thousands of abandoned cars along 17B.
There were, 500,000 people there and another million on the road trying to get there. And this is a small rural community that is reached by a 2-lane road.
Just one lane going all the way up to the site.
We saw a little corn patch converted into about the third or fourth city in the city in the state of New York. City size maybe a Rochester. Just one of those things that would almost scare you to see all these thousands of children out in the field.
Coming up, first day of the Woodstock Music and Art Fair, 500,000 rock and roll pilgrims sat in a farm field waiting for their musical heroes to appear. As the crowd continued to swell, the mood backstage was tense.
There was immediately a feeling of failure for the event, the promoters to make their money, all of that. Here's these fences that didn't really hold up.
The question was whether or not to accept the financial loss and officially announce that the concert was free. To John Morris, the answer was obvious.
Of course it's a free concert. They were already in there. But we had a conversation.
You are now giving the world's greatest 3-day freebie. Okay, there's only one way to do it. That's what it is. No, there's a way to do it. There is no way.
The only way to do it is to get into a rap with...
Okay, come here.
Walked to my office, called John and Joel and said, John, guys, this is the deal. This is what I think should happen. it's your tales.
By this time, it was clear that unless we charged admission, we were going to be broke, beyond broke. We were going to be in the hole, and it would take us a long time to dig out of that hole. Maybe never.
People came prepared to buy tickets. Why not take their money? What's the problem with that?
We might have a riot on our hands. The largest assemblage of people prior to that had rioted in Chicago.
In 2 seconds, both of them said, "Go do it." So I walked up on stage.
It's a free concert from now on.
And from that moment on, the audience was in it with us.
It was just beyond me.
What it means is that the people who are backing this thing, who put up the money for it, are going to take a bit of a bath. A big bath. That's no hype, that's truth. They're going to get hurt.
They were panicked. I mean, the money was hemorrhaging. It wasn't just flowing, it was hemorrhaging out the door.
The weekend of the festival, we were over $1 million in debt. And of course, the ticket money had somewhat dried up as a result of no gates being there to collect the revenues.
John and Joel had, you know, they had big fish to fry, and they were all dying on the plate.
By the first day of the festival, after 8 months of spending, Woodstock Ventures had accrued $3.4 million in expenses. Against the $250,000 they had borrowed and the $1.3 million in ticket sales, they were now nearly $2 million in debt. John Roberts was in hell.
I did have to make a call on Friday to the bank to say, this is going to cost me pretty much everything I have.
Forget the ticket booths, forget anything, forget a thought that had to do with anything other than keeping these people safe and giving them the show of their lives.
People out there, get away from the scaffolding, please.
Because anything less than that, I felt, was far too dangerous.
Michael and Artie were having a very different experience.
It was not threatening. None of it was threatening. All of it was very positive and very supportive, and every place you went, you felt it.
We just stood there with our arms around each other, just staring, you know? It might have mattered more to Joel and John because they were invested financially.
John and Joel were on one side of the fence, and Michael and Artie were on another.
It became a pattern after a while that it was kind of us against them. It was Michael and the production people letting us know as little as possible about how far over budget we were going to be.
Michael and Artie were, it's cool, man, it's cool, man.
These people are communicating with each other. That rarely happens anywhere anymore. Right. Has nothing to do with money.
Artie was on Planet 9. He was having a good time.
Artie Corey, how you doing, man? Out of sight. Good to see you, man. Glad you can make the party.
John and Joel had been grown up as responsible suburban young men who had a very different take on life than Artie and Michael.
Financially, this is a disaster.
But you look so happy.
I'm very Look what you got there, man. You couldn't buy that for anything.
I got to call my family over the weekend and say, you know, I'm getting in way over my head.
John had these very straight parents that he knew he was going to be answering to, and they were on the phone. The brother, I believe the brother was around somewhere at that point.
If I'm going to be writing checks, I want to make sure that they're going to clear, and I'm going to have to fall back on you.
John was shaken up a great deal of the time, and so was Joel.
My father and my brothers said, do what you have to do. They got a lot of credit with me, but I don't think the world ever realized how much they had invested themselves personally in my particular madness.
The tension that existed between Michael, Artie, John, and Joel had reached excruciating proportions.
And so, as the four partners each drifted into their own personal heaven or hell, the divine madness that was Woodstock continued. It was time for the musicians to play.
People were talking about a disaster, and we were going to have to be flown in by chopper or something, and it was still daylight, and we could look down and see people as far as the eye could see. Suddenly I realized this was out of hand. This was a free-for-all. This was going to be fun. It was the moment I realized that there was so many more of us than them for the first time in a long history and a long battle and struggles with people getting shot on the streets and stuff. This was our moment. And I remember getting there and feeling like, whoa, this is it.
Wow.
think they need it. It's amazing, folks. It's really beautiful. They're all groovy, you know.
The music was supposed to start at noon. It was now after 3 o'clock. As John Morris frantically hired a fleet of helicopters to fly the performers in over the traffic, Richie Havens was the first to arrive.
Of course, I ran for about an hour when they asked me to go on first, you know, because I didn't, it was already late, the concert, back at least 3 hours. And then finally, Michael, you know, he said, look, Rich, you know, we need something to happen. It's getting really crazy out here. I said, okay, Michael, no problem.
The Woodstock Music and Art Fair had finally begun.
I was only supposed to do 20 minutes. And I kept walking off stage, and they kept telling me to go back.
I kept running up to him and saying, keep going, Richie, I haven't got anybody. Go back out.
I think it was about 6 times. And on the 7th time, I didn't have anything else to sing. It was already 2 hours and change. That long intro is really stalling to figure out what am I going to sing. I started to sing the word freedom.
Freedom, 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 freedom.
That to me was what came out of me because that was all that was left. And then Motherless Child came into my mind.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
Which I hadn't sung in about 10 years. Sometimes we all feel like a motherless child, and, you know, in those days, more than sometimes, you know, in that sense. A lot of us couldn't go to our parents and talk openly about anything. And then another hymn that I sang when I was 16 years old was the section where I say, if I need my brother, I say brother.
Hey, mother!
So it all just melded together right there, and I had no idea. I didn't have any idea what I actually did when I walked off the stage. I couldn't remember one song I sang or anything. It was such an intense moment, you know.
I remember he was wearing an orange dashiki, and it was just, it'd been like you'd thrown it in the water and pulled it back out. And he said, I can't do it anymore.
Coming up, 3 days of music.
In this town and talking to them. We had a very pleasant conversation with a few of them this morning. They're very nice.
As the youth of America converged on Little Bethel, New York, traffic jams stretched out to 20 miles long. It's been estimated that for every one of the 500,000 people that made it to the festival, there were 2 that didn't. Getting to Woodstock was not an easy trip, and some of those who got there took even stranger trips once they arrived.
The brown acid that is circulating around us is not specifically too good.
What is that? That's hashish. It's hashish.
Wow, what is that?
Drugs were being used openly and freely among the huge crowd, and LSD was the hallucinogen of choice. The plan to hire members of the Hog Farm commune to minister to people on bad acid trips turned out to be a good one. There were over 400 reported acid freakouts at Woodstock.
One pill makes you larger, and one pill makes you small.
I remember when the first freakout came in. He's going, Miami Beach, 1944, Joyce.
At which time they would walk into the trip tent, and somebody would say, what's your name?
And he goes, Joyce! I says, no, what's your name, man? He says, Bob.
And if you go chasing rabbits.
Then I tell him, your name is Bob.
My name is Bob.
Your name is Bob.
And Bob would see that he was in a safe surrounding with people like him, and people were taking care of him. They guided him.
Good information if you're watching VH1 and you're ever faced with this circumstance. What's your name? And it's going to wear off.
This is really a mind of all times, man. I've never seen anything like this, man.
As the acid sideshow played out, the main act continued on stage. On Friday night, Country Joe performed, along with John Sebastian, the Incredible String Band, Sweetwater, Bert Summer, Tim Hardin, Ravi Shankar, Melanie, Arlo Guthrie, and Joan Baez. Arlo Guthrie was under the impression that he wasn't playing that night.
By the time I had got backstage, I was under the influence of so many things that when somebody came up and said to me, "Harlow, you got to play now, man." I said, "No, see, I'm not here now, man. I'm coming tomorrow," you know. But I got my guitar, my 12-string guitar, and I walked out on the stage, and I just looked around and realized this is big.
New York State Thruway is closed, man. Yeah, it's far out, man.
Every show that I go to now, somebody says, "New York State Thruway is closed," and I go, "Why couldn't I have said something smarter than that?" You know, like years later, my kid's going to rent the video, and I see myself on the screen going like
I was rapping to the Fuzz.
I was rapping with the Fuzz, and my daughter is holding her stomach. My kids are in hysterics on the floor. They're going to be like, "Oh, Dad, you're so weird, man."
Don't touch my bags if you please, Mr. Customs Man. Coming. Oh.
That Friday night, after a little rain, Joan Baez was last to play. The first of the 3 days of Woodstock ended at about 2 a.m.
Sweet.
'em. On Saturday, as the massive crowd grew even larger, the music began just after noon with a band called Quill. That day and into the night, the crowds danced to Santana, Canned Heat, Janis Joplin, Sly and the Family Stone, The Grateful Dead, Creedence Clearwater, and The Who. $500,000 young people were having the time of their lives. But backstage, the promoters had 500,000 reasons to be apprehensive.
A lot of people could have died if either the police moved in some way, or weather, drugs, lack of preparation, lack of water, lack of food. If they weren't panicked about that, they should have been.
Not only because many of them were stoned on acid and every other drug under the sun, but we had a situation in which there was not sufficient food on hand. There was no way to service the toilets. There was no way for ambulances to come and, God forbid, something happened.
The fabric of the weekend threatened to come undone.
This is at a time when we were begging all the bands to play double sets. We were so frightened of having a moment without entertainment, because now we had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids packed together, cold, miserable, possibly upset. We didn't know. Nobody could go out there and interview all of them, figure out how close to a powder keg this was. We didn't know.
As John and Joel worried about imminent disaster, Artie and Michael were at the concert, basking in the harmony of it all.
Everybody pulls together and everybody helps each other. And it works. It's been working since we got here.
The music went on until dawn without any noticeable complications.
You hear this music all day long, right into the night and right into the morning. To see the sun come up the Jefferson Airplane is something, really something.
Yes, to see the Joshua Light Show being overcome by the sunrise is quite an experience. That was really great. God stepped in and took over the Joshua Light Show, you know, the whole bit.
All right, friends, you have seen the heavy groups. Now you will see morning maniac music. Believe me, yeah. It's a new dawn.
On Sunday morning, as the third day of Woodstock began, there was still magic in the air. Against all expectations, there had been no riots, plagues, famines, revolutions, or even power failures, thanks in no small part to a surprisingly sympathetic local community.
We flew in with the 1st Army helicopters. Of course, we brought food, blankets, medical supplies, and at times flew a lot of the sick personnel out of there.
But as generations pulled together in that one small place, the outside world watched the festival unfold with curiosity and cynicism.
So what do the people out there think about what's going on in here?
Well, a lot of people think it's crazy, don't they?
Why? Nobody's hurting anybody.
There's a moment in the movie that many people have seen where a Wavy Gravy is on stage and he's saying what we have in mind.
Is breakfast in bed for 400,000?
I think my great moment of truth was when I got on stage and said, "Good morning. What we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000, which is when we introduced hippies to granola. They had never seen granola before, and we brought it to hippies in sleeping bags in Dixie cups.
And I think at around that exact moment, I was getting a phone call from Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York, who told me that he was thinking of sending in 10,000 National Guardsmen.
Oh, yeah, I was on the phone with him. I mean, we were all on the phone together.
So everyone else was having their croissant and orange juice. I was on my knees begging and pleading with Nelson Rockefeller not to send in troops. I don't think I said groovy. He wasn't the kind of guy who would have said groovy to, but I said, I think everything is just fine, Governor, and the only thing that could undo it is for 500,000 youngsters to see armed troops with rifles pointed at them.
It would have ended up like Attica. It was so frightening to people who had no idea what was going on.
And I guess at the last moment they said, never mind, it's not really a disaster.
He said, well, if anything goes wrong then, Mr. Roberts, it's all on your head.
As John and Joel stressed out trying to behave like adults at their office a mile away from the site, Michael and Artie were caught up in the frenzy and euphoria of Day 3 at Woodstock.
I remember just sort of feeling this reaction, you know, coming back from this mass of people, and it was, you know, it just kept me going on because I always called the end of the song, and I was just gone.
That powerful and dynamic connection between the performers on stage and their massive audience was an experience that those who played Woodstock would never forget. As the concert rose to a crescendo, even Mother Nature got into the act.
And the worst thing of this whole Woodstock 3-day thing was it rained.
During the Conquer thing, this storm came up on what would be the right field line if we were at home plate in a baseball thing.
Got mud, dirty, and everything went out of proportion.
The light towers out in the audience, which were scaffolding built about 5-6 stories high, had Super Trooper follow spots on them, which weighed about 250, 300 pounds apiece, and I could see them doing this on the top of these things, and their kids all the way around, and their kids on the towers. What went through my head was, this is too much.
Hold on to your neighbor, man. Please come down off those towers, gentlemen. Hey, put the power up here, all right?
The passage of the crowd over the performance area had threatened to uncover the cables through which the power was being pumped to the stage. I think it was John Morris called us up in the phone building and said, you know, we've got 500,000 people tightly packed together and they're wet, and we're worried that something could happen and that cable could be exposed and you'd have a mass electrocution.
I was just thinking about doing a business venture earlier in the year, and now I was wondering whether I was going to go down as a person who had electrocuted 50,000 people.
Coming up, the magic...
Old peasants wearing middle-aged garb, basically. It was raining, it was muddy, everybody was having a hell of a good time. It was exactly like the Middle Ages. Well, then you had the castle, which was stage and behind.
I pulled into Nazareth, I was feeling about half-past dead. I just need to find some place where I can lay my head.
By Sunday night, the rains of the third day had died down at Woodstock. There had been no electrocutions. People were starting to drift home. This incredible festival was now winding down. But still to play were 10 years after, the band, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Johnny Winter, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Paul Butterfield, Sha Na Na, and Jimi Hendrix. Artie Kornfeld was exhausted.
Put the boat right on
I asked somebody for something to keep me up, and I thought it was a Dexedrine or something, and obviously it was psilocybin. And I was sitting on Robbie's amp, and the band was playing. People in the mud screaming and, you know, tripping and all of this, and it felt surreal to me.
Artie never expected to find himself one of 4 guys hosting the lawn party of the century. He had also never taken an hallucinogenic drug before. It was a bad combination.
4 days before, I was ready to take off for the Bahamas. I was scared stiff. I pictured a life in jail for manslaughter when 20,000 people died. Being dosed in that position, like really basically second in command, you know, with the responsibility of all these people's lives, and all of a sudden you're in somewhere you don't even know. It was very frightening. Someone said, well, you absorb the negative energy. You know, it was scary. It was my first experience with psychedelics, and it was horrifying. It lasted until I was Thorazine down by the medics, and you know. And then when I woke up, Hendrix was playing the Star Spangled Banner.
Who had the will to still be at Max Yasgur's farm at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, or were just too dazed or transformed or exhausted to move on, Jimi Hendrix capped a long night of rock and roll with a resounding, soaring wake-up call.
I remember waking up and because I woke up because I heard the Star Spangled Banner, and there weren't 30,000 people there, where there had been hundreds of thousands. We wanted to drag the show out because we didn't want to end at midnight and have everybody say, I'm gonna go home in the middle of the night. And just bam, it would be in darkness, it would have been a disaster. And they had sort of drifted away. And Jimmy finished, and I got up, and I walked that field for about the next 5-6 hours because I was terrified that there was somebody dead.
Over the course of the weekend, there had in fact been 2 deaths. One from a heroin overdose, and one when a tractor inadvertently rolled over a man in a sleeping bag. And to this day, there is a legend that a baby was born at Woodstock.
Well, over the past 30 years, I've been called many times, and I was registrar at the time, and there never was a baby registered born in the town of Bethel. And if there was one, then there's an adult out there, 30 years old, without a birth certificate, and it would be up to them to come forward.
For all the trauma and panic and near disaster that went on behind the scenes, the Woodstock Music and Art Fair delivered precisely what was promised. 3 unforgettable days of pure peace and music.
Might have turned for the good, might have turned for the bad, but we never had any trouble. Never had no trouble. Nothing.
Though the crowd was 4 or 5 times larger than we'd anticipated, that most everyone could hear the music and that the sight lines were good, and that, you know, if you went far enough, you could find an empty bathroom, and that there was food to eat, and that if you were injured, you were taken care of, and that we could evacuate people. It all somehow hung together.
It was just very, very beautiful. Like, all the people were together, helping each other out as much as they can in any way they could. And, like, even the cops were beautiful. It was just unbelievable.
All these people in these little towns and villages thought they were alone in their desire for peace and freedom and love.
But they were all happy-go-lucky. Everybody was driving by. They were picking them up. There was a lot of hippies there.
And the amount of money that they were taking
and
for
one
tickets.
was picking up the other, and they had a ball.
The event, probably, that it was most like were things like Fatima and sightings of the Virgin. They were looking for something spiritual, for something that bound them together.
Whether it was the drugs, the rain, the music, the cosmology of the day, people decided collectively that we're going to make it work together. And I think that's what led to the legendary aspect of Woodstock.
It'll be 2 or 3 days before all the people leave the peace and quiet of the Catskill Mountains. Despite the problems, and there were many problems, though they were not as great as many people believed, this weekend says a lot about the youth of America. Many said they learned a lot about themselves and learned a lot about getting along together and priorities. And for most, that alone makes it all worthwhile.
30 years ago, late that Monday morning on August 18th, 1969, it was time for Woodstock Ventures to come forward, to emerge from 3 days of peaceful insanity to face the music.
And suddenly we were in John's car heading down to New York, and everything was quiet. And it was eerie. Later on that morning, we had a meeting at the bank.
Michael chose to stay up and clean up the site and sent me to face John's brother and father and the head of Citibank. I'm in a vest full of mud, you know, and this guy's dropping raw meat and these piranhas are devouring it. And I said, oh, God, this is trouble here.
As we left the site, my last image of the festival was a huge peace symbol that was made out of garbage. And then the next image was landing at the bank, seeing all these faces with chins on the floor.
The chairman of the bank had our file folder and was slamming it on the table saying, do you realize the position you put us in here at the bank?
We were sued by Monticello Racetrack, by the food concessionaires, by a couple of farmers whose cows didn't give milk for a few weeks. Which, you know, I think that had some merit. We were sued by the Alexander's Rent-A-Car because we lost 37 of the cars we rented. God, I don't really like reliving all of this all these years later. In all, there were about 80 lawsuits. None of them ever went to court. We settled with the farmers and the cows, and the rest were just dismissed.
There were over 30,000 sleeping bags left. And the reason for that is nobody wanted to traipse home a sleeping bag that was covered with mud. They couldn't carry it. It was too heavy. And I think we stayed almost a week afterwards, or at least 3 or 4 days, because we had to clean up.
And by Tuesday morning, we had a pretty strong feeling that something special had happened up there, and that if we left everyone else holding the bag, if we left the garbage lying around, that we would not only tarnish our own good names, but that we would undo whatever good had come from Woodstock itself, and that would stand for the irresponsibility of overprivileged kids. And so we made a decision that under no circumstances would we ever go bankrupt, and we never did.
Michael and Artie approached Warner Brothers, with whom they'd made the Woodstock movie deal, for help.
Artie and I went to Warner Brothers to try and get them to give us an advance to take everybody out of the problem, the financial problem, and they wouldn't. I guess they knew that they had a chance to take it from us.
Eventually, Woodstock Ventures made a new deal with Warner Brothers. John, Joel, Michael, and Artie gave up their 50-50 profit split with Warner in exchange for $1 million in cash, which paid off a good portion of John's $1.6 million debt. The feature-length documentary film went on to win an Oscar.
11 years later, I think we broke even, and even today, royalties are pouring in, hundreds of dollars a year.
Coming up, then the Woodstock Music and Art Fair into existence. Woodstock Ventures was crippled and weary. The company survived, but not in its original form.
Partnership didn't survive. Partnership broke up, I guess, a week or 2 weeks later. There was a lot of mistrust of Artie, in particular, I think, by John and Joel.
No matter how good a marriage is, if financial trouble comes into the marriage, right, it becomes strained no matter how much the people love each other.
I don't know what they thought about me at that particular point in time.
Our interests didn't exactly coincide all the time with Michael's. Some of them were clear, some of them were not so clear.
Business people started coming in, lawyers came in, and it started to become a very nasty situation.
I felt it was abrupt how quickly we lost Michael.
Four of us clearly could not stay together at that point.
We bought them out in September, and they went on and did other things. I didn't resent them for not having any money. I resented them because the depositions in the lawsuits, the negotiations with the suppliers, the dealings with Warner, working all of that out had fallen on us.
There's an old saying that partnerships often don't survive great failure or great success. I think this was a little bit of both.
When it was all over and the partnership was dissolved, what remained was the aftershock of a once-in-a-lifetime experience and its impact on 4 very different individuals.
It's like I was not born at Woodstock, nor did I die there either. Although the recovery did take about 15 years.
Oh yeah, we certainly had to let it go. It was just such a big experience in so many different ways that if you didn't let it go, it would have buried you. I think Artie had, for a longer period than I did, a tough time letting it go.
To recover from being Artie Woodstock, yeah. Before I got sober 18 years ago, it was like, you know, we'll get you high as long as you talk about Woodstock.
You don't want to go through life thinking that that's what you did. You did Woodstock. I think it's part of people's consciousness about me, maybe more than it is my consciousness about me.
That occurred when I was 24, and it was a huge turning in my life. And not to have taken that road is something that is beyond my ability to imagine.
I'm at peace with Woodstock now. You know, I wasn't at peace with it. There was something not right inside about it. You know, now it's okay. You know, because actually it is okay.
On May 3rd, 1999, Behind the Music was there when the Woodstock 4 got together in the same room for the first time since the day after the music ended at Yasgur's farm.
Hey. Hey. How you doing, kid? Hey, Johnny. How are you? Hey, nice to see you.
By the way, this isn't Artie.
I'm Artie's brother. Marty.
This is Marty.
This one plays golf. When did you start playing golf?
In the 3 decades after Woodstock, Artie Kornfeld stayed in the music business, working with acts like Blondie and Aerosmith. Financiers John Roberts and Joel Rosenman have remained partners for 31 years, investing in ventures from seafood restaurants to stationery stores. Michael Lang managed Joe Cocker for 15 years. In 25 years after the first Woodstock, Michael joined with John and Joel to produce Woodstock 94. They teamed up again for the 30th anniversary of the festival in July 1999. 225,000 attended Woodstock 99, and for 3 days, peace and music prevailed. But as the final day drew to a close, hundreds of young people went on a 5-hour rampage of arson, looting, and vandalism.
Woodstock shouldn't be all about this. There's gonna be no more Woodstocks, that's all I gotta say. No more Woodstock. It's over. Look at this world.
In the end, 500 cops in riot gear cleared the field. But as the flames rose, so did the questions. How did this happen, and why now?
The legacy of 99 is going to be difficult to call at this point. It certainly is reflective of the times. The things that have been happening in some of the high schools around the country can't go unnoticed, and that's an element in our society. But I think the vast majority of this generation is a very positive one. We're entering into a new cyber universe that is really going to be run by these kids. You know, I hold a lot of hope for that.
30 years ago, the first Woodstock Music and Art Fair took place hard on the heels of one of the most tumultuous and violent years in U.S. history. And for 3 miraculous days, the Woodstock Nation somehow kept the peace.
And I think that's why we're still talking about it, because the world still is in trouble. And for that weekend, at that spot, the world was not in trouble.
Freedom, 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 freedom.
All next week, look for premiere episodes of Enrique Iglesias Behind the Music 2, Where Are They Now?, Rock and Roll Record Breakers, and Tina Turner Behind the Music. New stuff next week, only on VH1.
Like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Alone, away from my home.
Thanks for tuning into Mr. P's Music Fans. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more musical adventures. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, keep the music alive.